I'm reading a book right now called Polishing the Mirror. A really great book, spiritual in nature and introspective. It's making me introspect a lot as I read it. And I came across a passage in this book the other day that I want to share with you. And it's about this idea of control. Right? It relates to this idea that we as social innovators and social entrepreneurs are seeking control. And what the book has to say about that I found to be quite profound. But before I share that with you, a little bit of the setup, right? I've been a social entrepreneur for years. And one thing that I know that I have felt and that it resonates with a lot of other social entrepreneurs, social innovators, people who are trying to create change in the world, is that despite recognizing what the world really looks like at times, we yearn for control. It's something that we deeply want. It's because it gives us a sense of stability, of consistency, and of predictability in the world that we live in. It's something that we are trying to bake into the world that we create in some way. Sometimes that means helping ensure that people who don't have control over the systems and the way that society works right now have more of it. Other times that means making sure that we can create stability for whatever it is that we're building that lasts over a long period of time. But the reality is that as an innovator of any kind, we need to recognize, and we do recognize, that the world is chaotic. It's a place where things change rapidly. And so we can't control this chaotic world the way that we want to. But the book reminded me that there is a truth that is deeper than that, something that is more spiritual in nature that allows us to do the work that we do, but rise above this yearning, this desire, this deep pull toward wanting control, consistency, stability, predictability, which the world often can't give us. And so I want to share with you what this passage was, and then just talk a little bit about what it made me think of. So the passage shares a story, and it says, there's a story of a farmer who had a horse that ran away. His neighbor came by and said, "Oh, that's terrible." The farmer said, "You never know." The next day, the horse came back and it was leading 2 other wild horses. And the neighbor said, "That's wonderful." And the farmer said, "You never know." Later, his son was training one of the wild horses, and while riding the wild horse, he fell off and broke his leg. The neighbor came by and said, "That's terrible." The farmer said, "You never know." The Cossack army came through recruiting everybody, taking away all the able young men. They didn't take the farmer's son because he had a broken leg. The neighbor came by and said, "That's wonderful." And the farmer said, "You never know." And so it goes. And really what the story is sort of representing is the fact that the world changes so often. It changes so much. But in fact, the things that we often think are bad end up being good. The things that we often think are good end up being bad, or at least seem like they are in the short term. But even that perception, even that short-term interpretation of what's happening, whether this thing was good or it was bad, gets us caught up in this same theory, the same fallacy of control. This idea that you can see the results of an action over the short period of time, over some short-term time span, and judge whether it was good or wasn't good. In many ways, this ties into a common philosophy that we buy into in society, though many don't call it by this name, is consequentialism. This idea that the consequence of an action is what determines whether it was good or was bad. But as I was reading this chapter and I was thinking about that, I was looking at the other things that the writer Ram Dass was sharing. And really one of the major things was this idea that we see the world through different lenses. One of those lenses is to see one another as the traits that we carry. So the color of skin, or the height, or the age, or some of those other physical features that we look at other people with and we use to categorize and judge them. A second way that we look at the world is through status and power. We see the jobs people have, we see the positions that they hold in society, we see the positions they hold within their own families, we see all of those pieces, and we evaluate those to judge and determine where things are and where people are. And in many ways, we look at these 2 factors and we say, well, if this and this, then that means that the world should function this way. And when the world doesn't function that way, we feel like we are losing control or predictability in some sense. But there are other channels, other lenses that we can choose to look at the world through. And I just thought that this was really helpful and profound as I approach my week in social entrepreneurship. Because one of the highest lenses, one of the biggest lenses, is to recognize that we are souls, that we have a soul within us, that I have within me a soul, that you have within you a soul, that there's something in you, right? Whether that language resonates with you or not, there's something in each of us that supersedes the status that we have in society, the color of our skin, these external indicators of success that we've collected throughout our lives. That in so many ways, the lives that we've lived, we've been creating this sort of statue, this image. We've been collecting experiences. And as we've collected those experiences, we've allowed them to begin to shape and impact who we think we are and who the world thinks we are as well. But deep down, we know that there is something in each of us that hasn't changed through all those experiences, that remains in common, remains in union with one another. And so that brings me to this idea of what allows us to do the work of building our social venture, of doing social impact work in the world, of helping other people, but recognizing that we don't have control over what's going to happen next. And we can't know whether every action we take or every response to the actions we take is good or bad. And the answer is to focus in on this soul and the connection between us. This idea that as long as I continue to yearn for connection with your soul and for the betterment of your situation in life, despite the fact that I can't control the specific outcomes, I can't control the specific inputs even, all of them. I can't control all these pieces. As long as I continue to yearn toward that, then I can continue to move toward my goals. I need to believe that somehow by resonating with this element within you, right, and this element within me, by being someone who chooses to connect beyond these social indicators, that I can be a model for other people connecting in that way as well. Then we can possibly have more and more people begin to act in a way that will shift some of the inputs for those who've been left out of our systems or left out of the progress the world has made. And we can know that whenever that shift doesn't happen the way that we want it to, that there at least is the intention by others to continue to correct that over time. I guess what I'm really getting at here is that what we can control is the frame that we choose to live in. We can control the frame with which we approach social impact work. We can control that element, and that because there's an element in me and an element in you that is the same, that if I resonate at that frequency, that I can possibly help you to resonate at that frequency as well. I can inspire, right, through my action, through the way that I choose to live, an intention to take care of all, right? And that is going to be a greater security, offer a greater security toward the type of long-term change that we want in the world than fixating too much on being able to control every one of the factors that we think are necessary to achieve the outcomes in the world that we're looking for. All right, that's my message for today. I would love to hear how this resonates with you. It's a little bit of a different message in some senses than some of my others, but I really want to know, what do you think of this? Does this make sense to you? You can't control all these outcomes, but you can control your approach. You can control the frame with which you move into these spaces and do the work that you do. And I would just love, again, to hear how does that resonate with you, or was there something else that you took away from the message as well? If you found this useful, please do like, follow, and subscribe. This is Social Impact Live. I'm your host, Darrell Coleman, and I'll be back tomorrow with another episode with social impact tips and strategies and frameworks and methods for you. See you then.